Okay, so I am with Deborah Enomoto. She's the one who did the Boundary Sozo encounter and demonstration. She and her husband, Chuck, teach a boundaries course here at Bethel Church, and it's an equipped class for our church. Is there anything else you'd like to say to introduce yourself or anything like that?
I'm just excited to be here to answer some questions because somebody always has questions about boundaries and boundary sozo.
Yeah, it's such a hot button topic these days. I feel like I've heard a lot about boundaries, especially in the last 5 years. I would say it's foundational to healthy relationships, and there's a reason it's a hot button issue. What got you excited and interested in boundaries and then ultimately teaching boundaries?
Well, because I am a sozo person, I handle a lot of issues that people have had in their life, and most of them wind up being related to either having not enough boundaries or no boundaries at all. And they wind up getting hurt. They wind up in my sozo chair, and then we get to discover, and the Lord brings the healing. What happened? People don't learn healthy limits, and once people understand, they've created a problem for themselves because they've not had them. They also have the empowerment to do something different. And that's my passion, because I love people to have the power restored to bring their life back into focus and productivity, because God wants it that way.
Yeah. And I know I've heard you talk a lot about boundaries being an area where you're taking responsibility and you're actually moving from any areas where we may feel like a victim to actually being a powerful person.
You put your little finger right on the spot.
Yeah.
Because we're not victims, we are victorious. And
Yeah.
all we got to do is start putting the pieces together and start speaking the truth, walking the truth out, and holding the truth.
Yeah, and just living it day in and day out.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, so quick testimony, I'm hoping you all have had some cool experiences and testimonies of your own this past week. I've actually had a couple of boundaries sozos with you when I was in the midst of some family drama, as all of us, maybe most of us, have experienced at some point. And I specifically remember a key thing you told me, and I've shared it with other people, where I often felt triangulated into relationships, meaning I was told different perspectives of an issue, but the two people involved wouldn't talk directly to each other. And you told me to just gently say the next time, hey, I would really prefer to keep our relationship about me and you, and then let you talk about that issue with the person directly. And just that one tool has radically changed the game for me.
And it would, because that's when you can become a powerful person and start eliminating the stuff that's creating a problem inside your heart. That would be resentment. It could be a place of division, and it could be a place of turning one person to the other, which God does not like. But being able to be honest is like honest about your relationships and saying, hey, you got a problem with somebody? Take it to them, because that's what God says to do.
Yeah. Speaking the truth in love, bringing grace to every situation. So,
totally.
Well, I'm excited. I hope you all are. Let's dive into the first question, which I found interesting, and I think it's a good one to touch on. And so this person said, I noticed the line of questions for each of the type of sozos that you've all experienced the last 4 weeks now is always the same. Is there a reason for that? Would the sozo ask different questions or approach the questions differently in different situations, or is that the guideline? I'm seeking to understand because I find that I'm already anticipating the question. So I did sit in on all of the demonstrations, the encounter times, and Deborah didn't. But what I can say, and then I'll let Deborah add anything on, is, so first of all, the encounters are very general, right? They're meant to apply to as many people as possible. And so you're right that the questions are along similar lines. But the beauty of that is that means that it's still a sozo, meaning that in sozo, we are all about getting to spiritual roots, getting that deliverance and healing that we need, and getting God's perspective on any situation, and getting rid of any disconnects between us and God. And so each of these specialty sozos is applying sozo tools just to specific contexts. So if you were to come in for a session, the minister would ask you probably some different questions that would more specifically apply to your situation to dig a little bit deeper. But they would always still come back to, what's God saying about that? Are there areas of forgiveness, repentance, breaking agreement? Are there lies you're believing? What's the truth? So still kind of that general framework. And one thing I forgot to mention, Deborah is one of our sozo trainers, oversees one of our teams here as well. So is there anything you would add to that explanation?
Well, you did a great job in explaining the fact that why they seem kind of same kind of questioning, because it's sozo. But absolutely, the questions would be definitely directed towards the specific issues that each person has. And God himself is the one that leads the session. So he's the one that puts his finger on things. We're just a facilitator. So we get to ask questions that would make sense to the person. And they might be very different depending on the situation that they're struggling with. So basic questions, yeah, they're probably pretty much the same, but the information that's gleaned through each one can be very different and very specific. And God always has a specific answer for each person and every situation. And he's always right.
Well, and from what I'm recalling in this moment, many of the encounters were really pulling on primarily basic sozo tools and questions. There are advanced sozo training and techniques. So the body sozo does pull from the advanced tool related to body work.
Yep.
But there are other advanced tools that you wouldn't necessarily see in these encounters. So we don't necessarily need to go into those advanced tools at the moment, but just know there are other tools in our sozo ministers tool belts to pull from.
Yes, every situation has its own need. And yes, we do have advanced tools, and they're not always needed in a basic sozo. So they won't show up. They only show up when they're necessary.
And that's the beauty and challenge of a prophetic ministry, is that it's not a checklist. It's every sozo may look very similar, and yet they all look wildly different because it is a prophetic ministry.
Yeah, when it's God's revelation, it's not the facilitators.
Yeah. Wonderful. So let's dive into some boundaries questions, because we noticed this week that a lot of the questions were not so much around the boundary sozo specifically, but they were around boundary questions in general. And I felt like that would still have a lot of value to everyone who's coming into this encounters course. And so some people submitted questions, and we're going to dive in. So first one is, these were all related to kind of some scenarios that people had brought up in their lives, which makes sense. Boundary violations are with people typically, or even with ourselves.
Yep.
So this first scenario has to do with a mom where she dropped her kid off at an event and was told that there would be a specific end time. She arrived at that end time, but then her kid still wasn't ready for another 30 to 40 minutes after the communicated end time. And she felt really frustrated with the director of the event and wasn't really sure how to handle the situation, and asked, I would like some advice for when you feel triggered when a boundary is violated or simply not honored.
Well, that happens a lot, because most of the time we haven't really exposed what our expectations are. And let's be honest, it's like when you have a child who's at the mercy of an event director, it's not the child's fault that they're late. It's just the way it happens. And the way situations go, we not being there, we don't know what all the circumstances are. But my recommendation to the parent would be to find out ahead of time, to find out exactly, is the timing correct? Is there a chance that there can be an overflow? Is there a possibility that wouldn't exist? And if it's a problem for the parent, then to make it real clear that you're going to be taking your child out when you're there because you have to leave. That's all expectation. And these are things that have to be communicated. If you're afraid to communicate limitations that you do have with schedules, that's another topic that has to be looked at. Most people are very, let's say, loosey-goosey around kids events because kids are kids and lots of excitement and there's just a lot going on. So I give a lot of grace for a child event, but if my time is extremely tight and I have to be a certain place at a certain time, I'm going to let that be known. And then the requirement will be is my child will have to leave when I show up. But that has to be taken care of ahead of time. So I would always say, if you got a problem with schedules or anything, address it before the event and to find out, is there a possibility for this event to run over, so that it's clearly communicated, and to also discuss it with the child, to let the child be aware that there's a scheduling issue. And if it's really tight, maybe you can make arrangements for other transportation so that bind won't be there for the kid. So, I mean, there's a lot to think about. I don't know what all the thing was, so it's kind of hard to address that from a detailed point of view. But that's my recommendation, is do a lot more communication.
Well, and here's a couple thoughts I have, and then I'd love to hear your responses or additional thoughts. So I always find it interesting in my own life with boundaries when a situation triggers me, or in other words, I start feeling emotions and I'm kind of unsure why I'm feeling that way. And as I've grown in my relationship with God and myself and others, I've realized I have a lot of issues around power and control, and often view situations as a win-lose scenario instead of boundaries properly implemented and knowing my values, because maybe this person didn't really know they had a value around having their kid be out there right on time until their kid wasn't there right on time. So it's like the trigger points to some values that aren't being met, some boundaries that are being violated, but kind of diving into why that's the case and what you can do in the future to better address it, which you talked about with communication. What would be some other ways to address the trigger itself?
Well, take time and know that it exists. Find out what's going on inside. Why is that a trigger for you? What is it that you're reacting to? Are you reacting to feeling unvalued? Are you reacting to be disrespected? Are you reacting to like they just don't care? It's like there's a lot of scenarios to be looked at. And for me, I always check in with the Holy Spirit and say, hey, wow, how come I'm feeling this way right now? Is it me? Is it them? What is it? Is it expectations that I feel like I'm been stepped on? So it's identification has to be the first step. Is why am I feeling this way? What is it that I'm feeling? You have to understand, what are you feeling? And if you identify that, you can always check in saying, hey, can you help me understand where's my motivation of my heart? Why is this hitting me so hard? Most times with parents, it's feeling of being disrespected. Sorry, but it's like feeling like someone's taking control. Someone's mishandling me. Someone's doing this on purpose to me. Well, if that's true, I can check it out. Isn't it's my responsibility to check it out? Nobody else's. I'm the one that's got the feeling. We're all responsible for our own feelings. Did you know that? Our feelings, we're in charge of. We can change how we feel. So if I'm feeling like someone's being disrespectful, it's up to me to say something, but it's also up to me to try and say, okay, is that real? Am I really being disrespected? Or is this just a reaction to something that reminded me of something that happened to me when I was a kid? And that's why I'm feeling the way I am. Because just because something is happening here doesn't mean it's real. You can be feeling something, but it's not actually what's really going on. So you can do some checking it out. Just check it out. Ask some questions. I mean, the question to the director might be, can you help me understand why my child has to be late when you said that they were going to be ready to be released at this time? Because I'm here and he's not.
Seeking understanding has been huge in my own journey of learning boundaries.
Big.
Yeah, because then I'm not jumping to assumptions.
That's right. And we all can manage ourselves.
Mhm.
So it's up to us as mature adults to be able to check in with ourselves to find out what's going on with me and taking responsibility for my own response. It's not my child's fault that he's late. It's not the director's fault. Well, then what happened? Well, I'm checking it out. I'm going to be asking some questions. Can you help me understand why this event had to go late?
Yeah, that's key.
Yeah.
And I love what you brought up too about checking in with the Holy Spirit whenever these things happen. That's why we love Boundary Sozo. And I'll just say what I've been saying for all of these Q&As is that our hope is you take these tools and integrate them into your life so that you can get that healing from the Lord from those issues so that you're no longer triggered by that same situation where you have new tools. And also, God knows your heart better than you do. God knows your past better than you do. He will bring up those memories that need to be healed, and he'll heal them in the way that you need them to be healed.
Absolutely. Give yourself a break. If you're having a response, you just check in. Ask some checking things out situations. It'll save you a whole lot of embarrassment.
Yeah, and then we can respond instead of react, right? We don't have to burn bridges every time someone crosses a boundary.
Absolutely.
We can choose connection and stay connected. It's a beautiful thing.
It
is. So, all right, next scenario was pretty long, so I'm going to summarize it. This is a mom of 4 dealing with what makes sense, different children with different needs, different ways of behaving, some bickering with siblings, a lot of activities, schoolwork happening all at the same time, having some issues around in her words, when consequences are enforced, we get punished by dealing with their meltdowns. So they ask them to move to another room, but then to their bedrooms until they calm. But the rowdiness disturbs the others who are behaving. So this is resulting in her feeling exhausted, drained, and frustrated because the boundaries they try to set in place or enforce get ignored or challenged. So many times it feels like a daily struggle. And here's the question. What is recommended to do to help her children through their big emotions and to help herself during these tough moments so she can handle the situation and communicate with love and not irritability?
Well, that's a whole lot in that one. That's a whole lot. And I think my first response to that would be a parenting class. Danny Silk has an excellent parenting class, Parenting 101. I recommend it totally. How loving your kids on purpose. The reason why I say that is because parenting skills are very rarely learned well because our parents didn't know how to. Danny Silk wasn't in their pocket when they grew up. So without having consistent ways of dealing with problems, and I mean both parents, if there's 2 parents in the family, they need to be on the same page and having the same tools and using them in the same way to be consistent. Kids love consistency. They actually do. They love structure because they're trying to figure things out too. I don't care how old they are. They like a little structure because they like to know, they like to feel safe. And if, as a parent, you're saying, you're giving them different responses every time they do the same thing, it's like there's no consistency, and it's very difficult for a child to be able to manage their own emotions when the parent has not been able to manage their own. So consistency with parenting style is very important, and being consistent with follow through. And each child, like I said, they're all different. So it's not a cookie cutter. What works for one child won't work for another. And that's just the way we are. So being able to have that connection, first of all, with your child and understanding that child's personality and their ways of thinking would be a big help. And not missing it, trying to coddle the other ones when someone's trying to be difficult. But it's managing your own emotions in an appropriate way that's consistent, meeting the child's needs. I love how Sherry says this. She says, what do you need? You know, when you're all in a tizzy, it's like, what do you need? Sometimes a child just needs to be heard. And when a child is having a hissy fit, there's something going on that's like a burr under their saddle. And it could simply be an inconsistent way of managing an emotion or a situation. So without being there, it's kind of hard to put my finger on it. But I would start with consistency, and I would start managing expectations with appropriate consequences that's age related. Oh, big. And if someone decides that they're going to have a meltdown, they can have a meltdown because it's their life. They're in charge of their feelings. You can always redirect them and say, whoa, hey, what do you need? Have a conversation. The meltdown, if it's disrespect or whatever, that's a place where you have to use skill sets that will manage your emotions first, not letting their reactions make you react. You want to respond, and you want to respond consistently. Kids having a hissy fit, I mean, they can have a hissy fit. If someone's having a bad day, you can always redirect the kids and get them busy doing something. You know, manage, give them a family thing that'll pull them away from the situation, and the little one can have their meltdown. And when they're ready to have a nice, calm conversation, they can come out and have a conversation.
Well, and I know Jason Valentin, I believe, has an e-course out called Parent Well. He also has a podcast. I think it's called Mates, Dates, and Babies, where he and his wife, Lauren, talk about some of these parenting things.
Yeah.
And I know that, so a couple research things that I know I've learned recently in the realm of parenting, just to back up the structure, consistency, needs of kids, is they did a study with children on a playground, and they found that when there was no fence around the playground, the kids kept really close to the leader or the teacher. But when the playground had a fence around it, they were running and using the entire area of the playground. So there's something about those boundaries that are clearly seen that does help a kid feel safe and ultimately be able to act in their childlikeness. And the other thing too is neuroscience is showing that nervous systems, when we're in a room with someone, we can either kind of amp each other up emotionally or we can calm each other down.
Absolutely.
And so in those situations, and I've been a teacher in a classroom in an inner city public school, middle school students, and if I got any sort of level of frustrated, you can guarantee, because I was the authority in the room, the kids would kind of lose their cool because they were like, what's happening? Versus when I was able to stay calm, I could actually help regulate their nervous systems. And I also know that some recent research is showing too that even just validating a child's emotions, because kids don't actually have language necessarily until they're a little bit older to even be able to explain their emotions. And let's be honest, many of us as adults may not even be able to understand or feel our feelings. So that might even be a first process is, are you in touch with your heart? Can you describe what you're feeling? Can you describe your triggers and be able to understand and heal? And then can you help your kids by just validating, wow, it seems like you're really upset right now. Can you tell me what's going on? And help them learn how to describe their feelings back to you, because they're communicating. The hissy fits are also a form of communication.
Yes, it is.
Because perhaps they don't know a better way to communicate. So I also know gentle parenting, which is not the same as permissive parenting. There are some good resources out there as well. In addition to Jason Valentin's, there's a lot of resources with how to parent kids well.
Yep. Well, like I said, Danny's awesome. He's got a great program. Yeah. And his daughter now is taking it over, and she's got Imperfect Parenting. I think it's a great resource to check out.
Oh, she has a book called Imperfect Parenting?
She actually has a podcast.
Oh, cool. So another podcast recommendation. Yeah. I think her name is Brittany Serpell. Serpell. I pronounced it incorrectly.
She's amazing. Amazing gal.
Yeah. So there's lots of good resources out there. But that might be a really helpful place to start.
Yeah.
And we're seeing some people in the comments saying, love the Danny Silk resources. Yes.
Beautiful.
Fun side fact, Danny Silk helped start the Transformation Center. So
Yes,
we
he
are
did.
a huge fan of Danny Silk around here.
Yeah.
So, okay, next question around boundaries. This person wrote about 3 different scenarios that they were having, and the theme was around boundary issues with people in authority. So one was a boss that they felt like they were experiencing what they termed emotional abuse, just being kind of put down, despised by their boss. Also, they have issues in relationship with their mother. So their mother, for almost 40 years, has used methods with crying, emotional stress, intimidation, and threats to pressure this individual through manipulation and control. And then finally, in a school program, and this individual feels like, they need to earn their living, they need to finish their degree. And so they're choosing to endure these situations, but they're wondering, how do I set boundaries with people in authority who have the capability to determine their future?
Wow. That's a tough road to hoe. Well, I think initially, I would start off with, let's find out why you're having that internal struggle with being afraid. Why am I afraid someone's going to control me? That someone's going to hurt me? That someone's going to kill my future? And the thing of it is that nobody can ruin your future for you. You get to make some choices. Now, do people in authority, they can make your life pretty miserable. But if you allow them to have that kind of power, that's not going to be very much fun for you for forever. So being able to deal with your relationships in reality, where did you lose your power to begin with? When was the first time you didn't feel like you were good enough to have a voice? Like the mom situation where the mom uses all kind of, let's just say manipulative kinds of things to control you. Well, that's a learned behavior that now you are now responding to anybody that is in authority over you that can work the same way. So is your mom in your head still? Let's get rid of that. Let's take care of that. Let's take care of your identity, that how important you are, because you are not the victim. You are powerful. And then there's the law of the land. Let's talk about that. In any kind of employment situation, there are, let's just say, chain of command. They have grievance, a whole things that you can learn and to follow, to do the appropriate steps to bring an awareness of a problem. If your boss is harassing you, if your boss is manipulating you, if your boss is threatening you, there are proper channels. But in all of that, there's always that place of, well, let's find another avenue for you. If that doesn't work out, what have you done to mitigate your situation? What are the things that you've done for yourself? Because you're powerful. You don't have to be the victim. You do it all. We call it due diligence. Is there other avenues? Are there other schools? Are there other bosses? I mean, there are other places to work. There's all kind of things to look at. But what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to kowtow to an emotional manipulation or blackmail. That doesn't work for me. And I would rather be on the street than be in that situation. So, but some people, that's too high of a risk. And all I can say is you have to count the cost. You count the cost. For me, for prevention, what I've always done is at the very first time something happens that is, something's wrong, that's the time I'm going to open my mouth. I'm going to use the law of exposure to end an I message. to let that person know that what their behavior, the things they said or did, has now put me on notice. It's like, I'm identifying within me, what am I feeling? That's in direct response to something that's going on here. I'm going to expose it for what it is. And I'm going to say, this is what I'm going to do if that continues, because I'm the only one that can control me. I can't control you. I can't control my boss. I can't control anything. I can't change anything, but I can change me. I can change how I'm going to feel. I'm going to change how I'm going to allow myself to be manipulated, because I won't. And that's up to me. But I'm going to count the cost. I'm going to evaluate the situation for real. I'm going to look at all the angles I possibly can. And then I'm going to go lock arms with somebody that's in my sphere, my helper realm. I call my war council, to see if I can get input from them. Because when I'm addressing a situation that is potentially harmful, I'm going to be practicing with somebody who's safe. And I'm going to be asking some questions to find out, am I being too bleh? Have I thought of everything? When I say this, are they going to say that? And to do a 360 of a situation. So I got somebody else's input to help me, because if I'm having a reaction to something, that reaction may not be all true. It might be something I'm responding to because of something inside of me. It's not real. The thing that they're doing wasn't intentional. But I have to do 360 to find out, because I want to evaluate a situation to be real. For a boss, I had a boss that was, let's just say, they could ruin my career. But I had to do what I had to do. I reported him, because I wasn't going to be controlled. That was putting me in a real bad spot, and I was not going to be harassed. But I had to count the cost, and everybody has to count the cost. And unfortunately, not everybody is integritous, and that is life. So we have to know what to do in a healthy situation. Where are my resources? I'm going to find out, what are my resources? What can I do? What is within my authority? What can I do? And then for the places that I need mitigation, I'm going to seek out the additional help. And it could be a lawyer. It could be going to the law and getting a restraining order. It can be changing my job. It can be changing my curriculum. It can be changing the school I go to. It can be changing my program. But I can go up the chain of command with appropriate documentation, not hearsay, because put things in writing. That's what I can tell you. Put things in writing. If it's a long-term harassing situation, when you have everything documented, that will help you a whole lot. Oh, boy.
So many good things. No, and what I'm hearing is, going back to, when did you first kind of lose your power, and documenting, starting from the beginning, any issues and all of these things. Someone asked here too, the law of exposure. Can you tell a little bit more about where to learn those steps and skills?
Yes. The Boundaries book, When to Say Yes and When to Say No to Take Control Over Your Life, by Dr. Cloud and Dr. Townsend, is the Boundaries book that I cut my teeth in. And Danny Silk's got a lot of his stuff that says the same stuff. But the thing of it is the law of exposure is in chapter 5 of the Boundaries book, actually. And the law of exposure is being able to tell somebody what's going on inside. What are your feelings? What are you thinking? What do you believe? What you're going to do, what you're not going to do, what you like, what you don't like. Being able to expose when something is making you afraid, or when you're feeling disrespected, or when you're feeling whatever it is inside. You get to tell somebody about it, because nobody can read your mind. Nobody can, no, nobody can. You can't read anybody's mind. You think you can, you prophetic people out there. But that's not always true. Okay, so asking questions, checking things out, finding out what's really going on inside of somebody before you jump to a conclusion. The law of exposure and the iMessage are two really good communication methods that would help us all with good relationships to be able to stay connected in loving well.
Well, someone also put in the chat that the Boundaries book does have a workbook to walk you through it. And also you have an e-course now, I believe, through Stephen De Silva's website, right?
I actually have a recorded equip class. It's 12 weeks long, and it's even got an additional training in there. So it's cheap too.
Well, the beautiful thing about the law of exposure is that in my own journey, and as I've walked through it with other people, it feels really big at first. And sometimes when things have built up over time, that's when it becomes an issue that damages relationships. But when you can say something when it's small, someone's response and reaction to you exposing your heart a little bit will give you a lot of information about how safe they are and what sort of relationship you can or should have with them in the future. So you can still stay connected to some degree with someone who you may not feel fully safe with. I'm thinking specifically in a professional environment, right? If on the front end of this relationship with the boss, there had been a little communication and you could have known this isn't a good relationship, you could have had potentially, I don't know the situation, but there may have been small boundaries and you could have been documenting from the beginning.
Very beginning.
Yeah.
And it's always helpful to have somebody as a witness in that kind of situation, by the way.
Yeah.
But
so good.
It's like addressing a situation as it happened, not 10 years ago. That never works. Deal with an issue in the immediate, right here, right now. Don't wait, because waiting can make it, you spin a whole thing in your head, and we all do this. Your whole big scenario, and you make this little infraction into this great big monster. So when you go to have your conversation, you blow up instead of having actually a nice calm conversation to say, I'm wondering if, because you have misunderstood the way they talked, because you have a code book that you've just now judged as being theirs. So now that's a whole nother topic, isn't it?
Well, but just as a brief side note, so when she says the word code book, she's referring to Dan Fairley's teaching on brave communication, which just states that we all have our own ways of communicating, viewing the world. Most of it comes from our childhood, what we are taught indirectly by our families of origin. And so we typically react to situations in the present from our own code book. And that, like, you and I don't have the same code book.
Nope.
So if we're reacting in our own ways, we're going to keep missing each other until we come to an agreement and until we both actually seek and gain understanding of the other's perspective.
Checking it out. I'm wondering if, you know, that big sigh you just had, are you upset with me? Because when I was a kid, when my parents had the sigh, they were mad at me. Are you mad at me?
It's the little things that add up. And one person is asking in the chat, how do you deal with an issue from, say, 2 years ago, which is often the case for many of us who've had boundary violations for a long time?
Yes. How do you do that? Well, it depends on the situation, depends on the people, depends on how connected do you want to be, and what is it going to mean to you? I mean, that's a loaded question, and it's hard to answer that without having some more detail. So for me, when I had to deal with a situation where I was abused, I had to address that from a place of, wow, can you help me understand why it was important to you to hurt me like that? Because I didn't know. And the only way I know is by asking. But if that person had not been safe to ask, I couldn't get that answer. It's like, is the person still available to you? Can you be vulnerable? Can you actually share how you were feeling at the time that situation happened? Is that person still in your life where they would even care to have a discussion? Most times 2 years past, Most times, nope, that wouldn't be true, but it's important to you. So if you need closure, I would get a sozo first and get the owie taken care of inside of you and seeing if that was sufficient. So if it's a relationship that you would love to have restored, I would begin with a discussion to find out, is there a time and place that you can bring that conversation? And I would recommend a safe place, not alone, but a safe place where they would, neither one of you would have the upper hand. It would be a safe place for you both to be. And then to start saying, whoa, I'll just, are they willing to discuss it? Because if they're not willing to discuss it, it's a dead end. You're going to have to handle your feeling and your owie. And God can do that. He can heal you from that. You don't need that, because you got to remember, forgiveness is a one-way street. You can forgive, but you won't have reconciliation necessarily, because it takes two. And if two people don't want to reconcile, you're wasting your time and effort. But you need to still get that owie taken care of. So get that owie taken care of, and then go from there. If that relationship is important to you, is the person open to do a reconciliation? And if those are yes, then a safe place, agree on a time and a time limit. You may even want a facilitator and just have a counseling session and have a facilitator be a part of it, so that everybody has equal airtime. Because in heated discussion, you're going to want to be able to get your point across, but they will too. So it's like, not knowing the situation, those are the things I can just like, there you go.
Well, and I love what you said too, kind of if the person is still in your life. And this kind of goes back to that previous question with the person and the authority issue with boundaries, is that boundaries, there's so many layers. And you mentioned before we started the Zoom call, it's a process. And so Sozo is super helpful, and to get you unstuck in some of those areas, get God's perspective on what's
Absolutely.
the root of the core around a
Mhm.
lot of times self-worth. Why don't I
Big.
believe that I'm worth
Huge.
good things and healthy relationships? But sometimes, maybe I would even go so far as to say often, if you're dealing with some really messy interpersonal relationships, or if you're dealing with manipulation and control in your intimate relationships, a spouse, parents, anything like that, you may actually need some additional ongoing support as you walk out the process, so that you don't destroy relationships, but so that you can step away peacefully if that's what's needed. Because potentially sometimes you might need some space from a person in order to actually heal and reset your relationship.
Yeah, there's time limits, there's geographical limits, there's all kind of things you can have at your fingertips to do. Sometimes you just need time away. Sometimes you just need somebody to facilitate.
Yeah, and there's a lot of resources available. And also, I did notice in the chat, someone's asking for the recommended books on the Facebook page. So in each module for the week, there's actually a little lesson for resources, and there's a downloadable PDF with any links from the resources that week's minister recommended. So you can check that out and download it. I believe most of the stuff we've said today are on there, but post in the Facebook group if something is missing from there, and we'll be happy to get you that link. One other book I would recommend is called Safe People, and it's by Cloud and Townsend as well, the people who wrote Boundaries. And so they actually just break down, here's some characteristics of safe and unsafe people, because many of us are drawn to unsafe people, or perhaps we even are unsafe because we don't know how to communicate well. And so we think we're safe, but we're actually unsafe to other people too. So it's a great self-reflection tool and a way to just grow in your relationships, because when one person in a relational dynamic changes, the relationship has to change.
Yeah, you brought something up that was interesting. Danny has another one, people helping people. And what I find, a lot of people with boundaries issues, they're trying to fix everybody, and they're trying to make everybody trying to make everybody happy, trying to be peacekeeper and all of that stuff. And it's like, some people don't want your help. Some people don't want your opinion either. So when you're trying to be helpful and you give somebody some information that they didn't ask for, that can totally be taken the wrong way. And you can be at the receiving end of a lot of rejection. So when your little heart gets hurt because you've done that, take a check. It's like, did they ask me for that information, or just I voluntarily vomited on them? Anyway, just a piece of advice.
No, it's great. And I know, so I'm a classic fixer. I'll just own it. I still have those tendencies sometimes, and I get to check myself before I wreck myself often. And so sometimes in conversations, it even comes up and with friends where it's like they're just talking about a problem. And I'm like, I want to fix it. And I have to remind myself, you're not a fixer. And so I'll even ask the person, would you like to process, or would you like my thoughts? And even then, sometimes I don't even ask the question, because if my gut response is to try to fix someone else's problem, I like to try to take a step back and just be like, they actually are capable of solving their own problems. It's a wild thing, but we live in a day and age with internet, with a ton of resources, access to a lot of help, and people are actually capable.
But you bring up a good point, because even going back to those children situations, it's like being a parent and being able to actually have wow, what's going on with how you feeling? What are you going to do about that? And actually becoming that springboard from them, or they can ask, you can ask different things, like, wow, it sounds to me like that person said something that hurt your heart. Well, what are you going to do about that? Because you don't want to take their problem, because it is their problem. They need to learn to take responsibility, because they're powerful. You want them powerful so that they can now stand up and say, wow, my heart hurt because of, and being able to address a situation in a powerful way, so that they don't become that person that is afraid of authority, that is afraid of getting rejected, that's afraid of not being loved, all that stuff. Teaching them really young, being able to help people is, do they have a problem? And can they fix it? Do they want help with it? Can they see they have a problem? Because if they don't see they have a problem, you don't have a solution.
Well, and what you're saying makes me think of the fact that growing up for me, it felt like being hurt was the end of the world. And just as an adult, realizing that actually I can survive having hurt feelings.
Absolutely.
And we learn those lessons young. And that safe people in our lives want to help mend our hearts. And also at the end of the day, it's okay to have hurt feelings sometimes.
And to take responsibility for your own feelings. You're the one. You can be responsible for your own feelings. You can't make me mad. You can't make me sad. Only I can do that. Now you can do stuff that'll make me aggravated or whatever, but it's up to me to say, oh, hey, can you help me understand why you're acting like that with me? That makes me feel very angry.
Because I remember this classic quote, I think it was from Dr. Phil, so a long time ago, that my mom would bring up at times, where we teach people how to treat us.
That's right.
So if we're not communicating and we're experiencing things we don't want to experience, then there's something that we actually get to change and take ownership for.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, and along the same lines, someone did put in the chat, they said, how do you know for yourself personally what is worth communicating when something is bothering you versus just processing internally and keeping the peace?
That's a good question. Well, it all goes back to your value system and your code book. Most people have a response to something because of a code book issue. It's how you were taught. It can be a cultural thing. It can be a familiar thing, but you learned a certain behavior. You learned a certain thing. So you can have a direct reaction to something, which means something to you, but it isn't real reality to that other person. So I have to take my first go-to is the Holy Spirit. I'm going to find out, I'm feeling this. I'm like, is this something that I create that? Am I seeing it right? You can do checking out questions instead of reacting to something. You can just check things out, check code book issues out, find out if what your experience is what's really happening in reality. And it's like, help me understand, I'm feeling this way. And it's like, not to be the victim, but it's to understand. It's like being able to allow people free will. That's big problem with most of us. And some people are very, very spoiled, very entitled, and they think everybody else is responsible for making you happy. Well, they're not. Only you are. And if someone is doing something to me that is in a direct conflict with ethics, it's a direct conflict with what I know is right for me, I will address it. No questions asked. If I'm talking about a code book issue, I'm going to check it out. I'm not going to jump to conclusions. I'll check it out. So that's kind of like what I do. My thumb is like, is it real for me? I mean, what am I feeling and how am I being affected? Is what I'm experiencing reality, or is it Memorex? No, just kidding. So it's like, you just, if it's important to you, then it's important for you to address. If you're feeling something and you know is not right, it's just absolutely not right for you, you absolutely check it out.
Well, and I'm thinking of the Bible verse that says, take the log out of your own eye, and then you can address the sawdust speck in your brother's.
Beautiful. Love it. Love it.
Like, deal with the hard issue in your own self first. And then you can actually continue to connect with people and have
absolutely. Well said, girl.
Gotta love the word, the written word.
Perfect.
So this is another question that was submitted in the chat. So this week they've been having things stirred up. So ooh. I know, classic sozo experience. Yay. What gets triggered or what gets revealed gets healed. So, or it can. So with the therapist, felt like they were speaking from the perspective of their experience and not the therapist perspective and not the client's. So kind of trying, in this person's words, they felt like it sounds like they weren't really being heard or understood. Mm-hmm. And then also with her sister-in-law would basically get blamed. So I'm just going to say it. Also, my sister-in-law, when I would try to speak to her and address my concerns, she would always blame her mental illness or drinking. So people often make excuses when I call them out, and I feel like their excuses violate my boundaries. How do I address this?
Why are you in a relationship with them? I mean, if they consistently not fun to be with, why are you in a relationship with them? I would set yourself up with some consequences and follow through with them. And once you've set your consequences and follow through, it should either correct the behaviors or you're going to have to maybe change your relationship. If someone doesn't want to be in relationship with you and they want what they want, you'll have to make a decision for yourself. Is this relationship worth it? And, family, you can't pick them. You can pick your friends, but you can't pick your family. So family issues are always harder because if you really want to stay connected, you're going to have firm consequences, and you're going to have to hold to it. And it may cause division. You just might lose a family member. And that's a reality. That's why you have to count the cost. So in all situations, you have to count the cost. So the Lord says to do that. You have to do the law of evaluation, and you have to find out what's good for you. Honesty. You have to be honest with yourself before you can be honest with other people. And when you're not letting your yes be yes and your no be no, you're lying. And that's going to create another problem for you. So in any relationship, when they don't want to have a change of what they're doing and it's bothering you, you're the only one you can control. You're the only one that can set yourself up to win, and you might lose a relationship. That's the God honest truth. So if the relationship is worth holding on to, the person has to be willing to change. The only one you can control is you. You can set yourself up some healthy parameters so that you don't have to have that hurt heart. But knowing that everybody has free will. Everybody has free will. And everybody does what they need to do for themselves. And we have to allow it because God allows it. But I don't necessarily have to allow them to hurt me. I get to control how I'm going to be handled, which means I'm going to choose not to be around somebody who can't behave themselves. Does that make sense?
And you can have a whole lot more peace in your life. You're responsible for protecting your peace. And you don't know what can happen, how the other person will eventually choose to change when they start feeling the effects of their behavior by distance from you.
Preach it, girl.
You can't control someone else, and it's easy to try to do. And that's kind of classic codependency, right?
Perfect.
Yeah.
It's a bottom line.
If I'm not okay when you're not okay, there's codependency.
Don't work.
Yeah. It's hard. I mean, easier said than done, right? It's easy to say this in a Q&A. I can tell you from my own journey, it's been a years long experience. It doesn't have to be that long, maybe for others, for sure. God can accelerate. And also, it can be a little messy. And
you said something right.
Yeah. Oh, good. Hopefully one thing.
I think what was also missing sometimes is people are in isolation. They don't have enough community around, safe people to be able to help them stand strong. Because when you start setting limits, it is scary. And you got to have somebody in your corner that you can practice with. You can talk through stuff and actually share what's going on inside and get different perspectives. You need somebody to lock arms with to help you, because it's not easy. And family members especially, that's the hardest bunch of people to try and set limits with is your family.
And ideally, you can do that with friends or a church community.
Yeah.
And also, let's be honest that sometimes even church communities aren't always safe. That's why actually reading a book like Safe People to actually determine, is the community that I'm a part of, are they actually safe? And that's why we recommend, sometimes it's really helpful to actually get a support group, or to truly get a paid professional in your corner as you're transitioning out of this, because most likely if you have a boundary issue in one area or one relationship, you're probably repeating that same thing in all the relationships that you have.
You got it.
Yeah.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah. And no, so there's someone saying if I'm not okay, it's codependency. No, it's more of a, that's not it at all. It's more that if you're in relationship with someone and when they're not okay, you also are completely not okay. You're not able to be at peace.
Yeah.
There's some level of their emotions impacting you in a way where you're actually taking responsibility.
Yes, that's false responsibility. Don't do that. That will hurt you.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, it's tough. And it is especially tough with family members, because we want to be loved. We do. We want to be loved and we want to be accepted. We want to be valued. And when our family members, who are supposed to be our champions, aren't, we have to get those needs met appropriately someplace. So.
Well, and God created family to be the model for safety and unconditional love. And so that's typically our blueprint for what safe is. And so even research that I've been reading on trauma is that whatever blueprint you've kind of internalized, that will feel safe to you moving forward, even if it's not actually safe.
Familiar
is that's a great way to say that.
It's familiar.
Yeah.
Break those familiar bonds.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a process. And one person put in the chat another resource. It's called Codependent No More.
Yes.
How to stop controlling others and start caring for yourself.
Good job.
So I love this. I love the day and age that we live in with so many resources readily available, even free, tons of blogs on how to do all of these.
Yeah.
So we are wrapping up. We're in the last minute. Do you have any kind of closing thoughts you'd like to leave our audience with today?
I think maybe the most valuable thing I could say is tell the truth. Tell the truth, know the truth, and stand up for your truth. And being able to have your free will, but allow others to have free will. Take responsibility only for your own feelings, nobody else's. And I'm not saying to be a jerk. I'm saying you can be empathetic, but don't take responsibility for making everybody happy, because that's their job. And that will make your life so much easier.
A lot more peaceful.
Yeah. For sure.
Wonderful. Thank you all for joining us. So next week, we're going to be meeting with Stephen DeSilva, talking about financial sozo. I know, it's so fun. Deborah also does financial sozo too, so it's kind of exciting. And feel free to continue popping your questions and your testimonies into the Facebook group, and we will see you next week.
Bye-bye.